Hey there, I'm Zach Abramowitz, and I'm Legally Disrupted. On episode 25 of Zach Abramowitz's Legally Disrupted, I had the chance to sit down with Raghu Ramanathan, who's the president of legal professionals and government at Thomson Reuters, as well as David Wong, the chief product officer at Thomson Reuters, to hear about the most recently released Future of Professionals survey. I took a long look at this survey in 2024, and it was really the basis of a lot of our theses and our view of the market of where AI was going in legal. So it was really interesting to have a chance a year later to see how things have changed over the course of the year. Spoiler alert, adoption is up. But check out the entire conversation now with Raghu and David. Let's get disrupted.
Okay.
All right,
we're live.
Super.
We're being recorded and transcribed. And Microsoft is reading everything that we're saying. Just kidding.
Yeah. The content of these calls will not be used in the training of their models, maybe.
That's what they've committed to us.
Yeah. So I think the sort of the primary function here is to talk about this survey that you've released, the professionals. Sorry, I'm getting the
future of professionals, right? The
future professionals. Now,
this
is the future professionals survey. Now, I think what's interesting is, so you should know, I actually read this survey last year. I pay attention to a lot of these surveys, and my feeling is it's hard to know when you're looking at one single thing. Is this really true? I'll just give you an example. Lexis, the Law 360 survey that was released earlier this year, says that Lexis is one of the most recognized AI tools. Okay, so it's not that I don't think that might be the case. It's just that you kind of have to look at everyone who's releasing these surveys, has a little bit of something in it. But I think that it's very useful to be able to kind of triangulate off of multiple surveys and data points. So I thought, there's some really interesting stuff in there last year. I think that, just to give you one example, and this is something I have on slides, is the expectation that AI would save around 200 hours. So I found that really interesting. Why? Because if you sort of assume a 2,000 hour billable rate, it's about a 12% productivity increase. And there was a study that came out from the Harvard Business School and the Boston Consulting Group very early in the lifetime of ChatGPT. And they took two groups of consultants, one who were allowed to use AI in the course of their work, one group who wasn't. And the group with had a 12% productivity increase, exactly lining up with where you guys are. So again, I think there's a lot, sometimes you look at I'm seeing that a bunch of places. The other thing I found really interesting about that survey, and about the question itself, and in terms of how we're thinking about AI, is I think that there's a sort of categorical shift happening with AI, which is that most software up until now has really, at least the software of the last 15 and 20 years, has really been all about the company, right? So think about CRMs, ERMs. It's all about the company being able to figure out
internally manage themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, manage themselves, get insight, so that C-suite has insight into what's going on the front lines. But a lot of time, that software did not necessarily inure to the direct benefit of the employees. Think about every salesperson that dreaded putting their deal points into Salesforce.
Or the clients, if I might add, Zach, right, as well.
Exactly. So I think what's sort of categorically different about AI is AI really is going back to the person, right? It's like we've given everyone this sort of amazing assistant that in some ways is not as good as a human, but in some ways is far better than a human. And the sort of the expectation that what is this going to do for you, for your own personal efficiency? I think on its own is kind of even the question itself is interesting in terms of how we're thinking about software in ways that we might not have previously. So I have been paying attention to it and others. So I'm really interested to see sort of what you asked this year, because I think sometimes the questions are frankly more interesting sometimes than the answers, in terms of what are the lingering questions? And I'm very interested to see. I already know that the savings is up, as an example, what people expect to save this year versus last year. And I think there's sort of an interesting AI adoption change that's happened over the course of the last year, where maybe early part of 2024, we're seeing the Bain survey suggesting that lawyers are disappointed with AI. And then towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year, several surveys indicating, no, there's been a significant adoption since then, and that attitudes towards AI are overwhelmingly positive. So
yeah,
all of ways
so,
saying like, yeah. I'm really interested in this stuff. Yeah. I'm looking forward. What do you have to show me? I don't know if you want to like share slides. I don't know if you want to speak to certain points and point me to, and we can take the conversation that way. But I kind of wanted you to understand like kind of where I was coming from in general with the surveys that you and others have released.
That's great, Zach, and maybe I'll take that, right? So first of all, it's useful to point out that the survey that we did is a survey of professionals, right? Not of companies, not of decision makers. It's actual legal professionals to say, what are your thoughts on AI? And it's also not a survey about specific vendors. It's a survey about, the shape of the industry, the adoption of AI. So it's agnostic to all vendors, right? And this year's survey, in a way, continues a lot of the trends that we saw before, but also highlights some new twists, if I might add. What it continues is the fact that the penetration of AI and the productivity gains are increasing. Maybe even before we go to the survey, one of the other points that I wanted to say, Zach, is I'm relatively new to the legal industry, just 18 months in. And when I was joining, people warned me. They said that, look, this is not a technology-friendly industry, right? Innovation goes to die in the legal sector. And what's happened, and I'm thankful about it, what's happened is that the pace of adoption has been really furious in the last 12 to 24 months. We've gone from an industry, from our own data, where small single-digit percentage of law firms were adopting AI beginning of last year, to now, according to the survey, over 35% of law firms adopting AI. And what's interesting as well, the law firms are even slow. The in-house legal counsel are adopting it even faster than the law firms.
So that I was very interested. I thought that was a very interesting data point that I wanted to dig into. Can you give me a little bit more like context with how that was defined, how the question was asked, and sort of some of the insights that you see around it and some of the implications?
Yeah. So I think the question was very simply, do you use as a professional AI in your day-to-day work, Gen AI tools in particular, right? And there was a 10% at least, and I'll get the number right, higher pickup in the in-house legal department. And I think the reason is pretty obvious. In-house legal departments are under enormous cost pressure. Law firms are not under cost pressure. In-house legal departments have budget problems, and for them, this is something that absolutely fits with their strategy, and they're more under pressure to adopt these tools, show the benefits, right? But again, if you step back, an industry where has gone from a low single-digit percentage usage of AI among legal professionals to now 35 or 45%, depending on the law firm's in-house legal counsel, that's just simply incredible. The other thing, which I would say is more a gradual progress, last year when we surveyed the professionals and we said, how much do you expect to save in terms of time? And you've done your research, Zach, right? They said 200 hours, right? Is roughly what they expect to save in a year. Now they're saying it's 240 hours, right? So, it's it's jumped up. It's a 20% jump. It shows the confidence, the optimism among the professionals on the Gen AI tools. And what's really fascinating is if you take it back and you say if it's 240 hours per professional, and if you say the average rates, if you think about it, that equates to about $19,000 of savings in a year. And then if you multiply by the fact, I believe we have about 1 million lawyers in the US, that's about $20 billion in terms of effort saved by Gen AI across the legal sector, right? So that kind of big picture for me was very, very fascinating.
So let me then go and dig for a minute. And then David, if you want to jump in with a reaction here as well, we can keep this dynamic. One of the things that occurs to me, and this may not be a kind of like pro Westlaw take is that when you're talking about the corporate legal departments, there are several differences between a corporate legal department and between a law firm as a buyer. But one of the things that and the incentives and everything that goes with it, one of the things that occurs to me is that it is probably more likely the case at a big company that you may have access to one of the foundation models, like a Gemini, a Chat GPT, or a Claude, than you do if you're at a law firm where, with rare exception, I think those are mostly non-firm approved tools. Did you see that? And what are the other sort of distinctions around these two buyers, and why it is we might be seeing more adoption, other than the sort of like straightaway like incentives point that you made, and the fact that there is, typically a legal department is not going to be rich with tech budgets and is going to be, going to have a greater incentive to quote unquote do more with less.
Yeah. Maybe David, I'll get started, and I'm sure David has some thoughts on this as well. So I think you're absolutely right. The law firms, when you think of the legal industry with its heavy fragmentation, at best, when you compare to the other industries, you would talk about the legal industry as a small to medium business industry, SMB industry, right? And when you go to corporates, they have much larger budgets, they have bigger AI programs, they have much more investment. So I think that is a factor. There's definitely a much more of a programmatic approach to roll AI across all of the divisions. But to be honest, what we're also seeing, the legal department being the legal department, they are super cautious. They do not want to dabble with tools where they enter data, where they do not understand the security, the privacy behind this. So increasingly, what I'm also seeing, even in the corporate world, is a gravitation towards function-specific AI solutions.
Function-specific AI solutions.
Like, for example, a legal AI solution as opposed to a general purpose LLM, right? Or something specifically for procurement, or something specifically for customer support, right? So what you're seeing is emergence of, you could call it best of breed AI vendors who, by the way, like us, right? It is not that we are developing our own AI model, right? We work on top of the LLMs, but we provide a layer which makes it highly relevant for that particular function, and of course train it with the content that is needed for these models to work, right? So I think that's where the world is going. But David, I'm sure has more insights to add.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. But I do think within corporates there is this push for horizontal sort of general solutions which are getting rolled out. And if you sort of compare the CEO of a corporation versus the managing partner of a law firm, the CEO of a corporation is pushing the agenda for AI, I think, a lot more aggressively, and pushing for adoption. So I could see, and we see that in a lot of corporate legal departments, that they're being asked to use some general tool that's being provided for the corporation. And then they're also taking a look at the vertical or the function-specific tools. I think there's a place, by the way, for both, right? I mean, it's interesting because I would say that right now in the marketplace that it is now increasingly competitive, not just between the legal providers, but also with the horizontal providers. I think we see ChatGPT, I think we see Copilot, I think we see Claude now trying to go and solve the legal use case and every other use case, frankly, that's out there. So I think that's certainly a factor for the corporates for faster adoption.
Has there been any discussion? I know this may be, not something that you can tell me, but has there been any discussion or thought of maybe Thomson Reuters or maybe the Westlaw products should actually either sit in or be triggered by foundation models, so that a general counsel or an in-house counsel, it might be working because their company works with Gemini, but every once in a while, there's certainly going to be work where that it's going to need to trigger, oh, I'm going to need to go and use Westlaw for that. And that might actually sit inside of the AI, or at the very least be triggered by an agentic workflow. Are those are these conversations that are happening in the product room that you can share with me and maybe speak to, if not with direct inside experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a question and discussion that's happening. I think that, there's now a lot more complexity in the ecosystem. I think lots of different options are being put on the table. When we talk to customers, I think customers are looking at sort of the balance between, do I want one solution to kind of rule them all, or do I want to have something which is purpose built and something that I can train a function for? I think the jury's still out. I think the agentic push definitely kind of has opened up a new set of conversations because people want agents and assistants to be able to interact with each other. But I think it's still pretty early. I mean, we're certainly asking the question ourselves and saying, hey, where would it make sense to be part of an ecosystem or not? But as I mentioned, it's a new competitive dynamic as well, and it is a little bit tricky right now, I would say, to want to do something like that with a Gemini or an OpenAI, because they're trying to earn the business of the same customers and trying to solve many of the same problems.
Yeah, and I would echo something that you said, which is we're still early on with agents. Yeah. I heard Andre Karpathy put this perfectly. He says that there's been some discussion that 2025 is the year of agents, and he said I think it's more like 2025 is the first year in the decade of agents, which is to say, like, there's some clunkiness to work out. And by the way, I think we're going to get some absolutely hilarious stories of AI agents doing funny things inside of companies. And I think it will be the kind of like new reply all disaster that, people would talk about, where like all of a sudden everyone's getting emailed and no one can stop and it just keeps on coming and coming. We're going to get some of that with agents. So I appreciate that this is certainly early on.
And Zach,
in that conversation.
If I can add a few things building on what David said, right? And in this conversation, we were one of the earliest companies and to co-innovate and to work very closely with Microsoft, who we still have a close relationship with. And we actually developed, by today's terms, what you call a legal agent, right? Which sits with Copilot, and Copilot can draw upon for legal specific questions, right? Which was highlighted in Microsoft's big conference. So I think to David's point, right, it is something that we are definitely open about. But again, just to be very clear, in Thomson Reuters, we consider ourselves not to be a pure content company, right? We are a technology company, building on content, and therefore, it will not be our strategy to provide a raw access to our Westlaw content, for example, or practical law content to AI providers. But definitely, we will think about how CoCounsel as a technology, as a platform, as an agent can plug in with, other technology providers.
Got it. So let's then go to some of the other data points that we really ought to be highlighting, as I appreciate the difference between law firms and general counsels. Yeah. One of the other ones that stuck out to me, and I don't know if you maybe have others you want to highlight first, but just since it's on the mind, is the question of a clear AI strategy. And this is something, obviously, as someone who works with companies on their AI strategy, if the idea was like, let's create a data point that Zach is going to put into all of his slides and quote Thomson Reuters, well done. So tell me about like the AI strategy and its impact, and then also how, like, what are the parameters of that? Like, what does it mean to have a clear AI strategy? Or is that sort of just in the eyes of the beholder? And generally speaking, if you have companies that feel we've got a clear AI strategy, you've got one.
Yeah. No, great question. And in fact, that is one of the highlights of the report. The headlines is, and this is not our view, right? It's the view of the professionals, that if their company, if their law firm had a clear AI strategy, they feel that they're 3.9 times more likely to feel there are benefits coming from it, right? From the rollout of AI in their law firms, which is very striking, right? This kind of made us step back and take a look, right? And to say, look, that's a big difference. If you think you're 3.9 times likely to get benefits from AI if you have an AI strategy. Now, we went back and we didn't do it as systematically as rest of the survey and said, what do you mean by AI strategy? What does it mean for you, right, to your question? I think there are various different elements to it, right? So one I would say is just about the whole concept of, is your firm an early mover? I still come across many law firms who say it's a tried and tested model in the legal industry not to be first, right? You want to see how others deal with technology, right? And then you come in later. I think that paradigm has completely shifted with AI because we're not talking about implementing cumbersome practice management systems, like to your earlier point, right? These are not management focused. These are cloud solutions. You can go really fast. The cost of getting it wrong is not that high. So I think part of what people mean by early strategy is just, even if my firm thinks they want to roll out an AI solution. The second aspect of AI strategy is definitely leadership. And I've personally seen a difference between law firms where the managing partners are hands-on with the AI strategy. They put themselves out there, make themselves a role model for using AI, rallying the troops, getting everybody together to say we're going to do something, versus other law firms where the managing partners are perhaps not as interested in technology and they think that it's some tech committee needs to handle it, right? I think that's a key element of it. And finally, if I can say,
Do we
yes.
know? And I didn't happen to notice this, but maybe it's data that you have. Do we know what percentage of managing partners at AmLaw 200 / equivalent law firms are, themselves using AI or tell you that they're using AI? Because I've thought for a while that this was sort of required, meaning I've seen the difference. The American Arbitration Association is a client of ours. Their CEO, Bridget McCormick, is on AI every single day. That has a way of impacting the rest of the organization when it's at the very top levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, right? So now this was not part of the survey, but separately, we have the luxury because we have lots of data around all our lawyers using our systems. And one of our hypotheses, interestingly, Zach, in the early days was it's the younger lawyers who are going to use it, right? And we've scrubbed the data again and again. And interestingly, that pattern is not reflected. Interestingly, I would say there is no correlation between age and usage of AI solutions among our user base. I wouldn't go the other way around to say older people are using it more either, right? But there is no correlation, right? Which shows that
but there is a different learning curve. I think I remember seeing that point in the study as well, that millennials tend to pick it up a little bit quicker than boomers.
That's correct, right? So I think from maybe an initial training or other purposes, millennials tend to pick it up quicker. But also, I would say the reason why the correlation is not there is the more experienced lawyers probably know how to use it from a use case perspective in the right way, right? Which the newer lawyers need to learn. So I think that kind of those two trends kind of balance it out. But to your point, I don't want to say there's any pattern, right? So what we see is it's individual by individual. There's no correlation to say in general there's a low adoption or high adoption among managing partners. But I can 100% agree with the example that you gave, right? Where we see the managing partners make themselves a personal example, this moves the law firm significantly.
Yeah, maybe to add, I think the thing that Raghu, you didn't mention yet as part of the strategy is a lot of the firms are now saying that they also understand what the ROI is. And so that's one of the big differences. Like when people say, hey, I've got a strategy, it's not just I have a plan to go do things. Most of the time it's I understand what the business impact's going to be for either my firm or for my company. And I think that's where managing partners really have sort of changed their knowledge, which is before, if we kind of roll the tape back a couple of years when we first did the survey, they would say, oh, well, we're experimenting. We're like trying stuff out. And, many managing partners, didn't use it day to day, et cetera. Now, they might not use it day to day. It's possible, right? Like, there's still managing partners that are very, that they want to do things the old way, but they know what the business impact is. They'll know, okay, well, if I invest in this, then I'm going to get this type of benefit from my firm. And I think that's a pretty big difference. That they're understanding the ROI.
And how do you think they are measuring the ROI at this point? Because I think the kind of word on the street is there's a deep feeling that obviously this is good for companies to be using, but it's not like it's decreasing the bill to the clients. It's not like it's saving there. And I think there's probably even some question of whether it's saving and increasing the firm's bottom line. So then how do we think about the ROI?
Yeah. So great question, and there's a lot of thoughts in my head, right? We can go in different directions. So one thing I want to start with by saying is the more immediate and definitive way that most law firms think about it is time saved, right? And we'll come back to your question, Zach, on what does time saved do in terms of the business model, et cetera, right? But let's just say it is a fundamental change in the industry that you can save significant time for the work that you do. So one of the things that we do, again, because we have a luxury of having hundreds of thousands of lawyers using our AI solutions, and we have the data in our products and our systems, and we see how they use it. And we are seeing on an average for kinds of legal tasks, anywhere from 40 to 60% savings in time for typical tasks, like creating a legal timeline, right? Our benchmark shows that creating a legal timeline, you can do 78% faster, right? That's the fact. Now, I'll give you an example of one of the law firms that we're working with. They've gone out publicly and they said a few quarters ago, in that particular quarter, using their AI solutions, they saved 6,000 hours of lawyer time, right? That's about a 1,000 people law firm. So, so they saved 6 hours per lawyer that quarter, right?
Yeah.
And we can do the math, what those rates mean. That's substantial, right? So that is the reality. The reality is like there's another law firm which is now saying they're pretty close to saving about half a day in a work week for a lawyer, right? Kind of comes back to, again, do your math, 10%, right, of savings. So I think that is definitely a very, very solid way. And one of the talking about leaders, right? One of the law firm managing partners, I was there with them in an all hands with all of the lawyers, right? And he was standing in front of them and saying, I'm convinced that what we do today, we can do it with 20% less lawyers if that's all we do in a few years' time, right? And part of the pitch is to say we won't be doing just what we're doing today, right? Of course, we'll be a different company, but just acknowledging that if we just do exactly what we do today and we keep doing it, we'll just need 20% less lawyers, right? So I think we got to start with that. I have other thoughts and I can go in terms of other benefits than time saved, but I think that's at the heart of it.
David, anything to add on ROI?
Yeah, well, I mean, time saving is absolutely at the core. It's the most measurable thing that you can get. And like we asked on the survey, when we talk with our customers, they also talk about improving the quality of the work, right?
Mhm.
So they talk about more creativity, fewer errors, being able to be more likely to win in an adversarial situation. And those are all real as well. They're harder to quantify though, because
Yeah.
it's hard to be able to say, oh, well, I'll track the data over the course of the last 5 years and we'll see what the change is. But we certainly are hearing that as well, that it's both about sort of doing the work with higher quality as well as doing the same work for lower time and cost. I think the
Yeah.
other thing about the
Sorry,
ROI
David,
though
please go.
is also how it then translates into how the firms are choosing to kind of implement AI and use AI. So, again, we started with this idea of like a clear strategy. We didn't talk about like, well, what are the kinds of strategies that we have? And there's pretty big diversity there. And that's less from the survey and more from how we talk with our customers. And there's a pretty broad range. You have some that are saying, well, I'm just going to get efficiencies where, there is, grunt work, right? And that's sort of like a modest benefit to the firm or to the business. Then there are some who are saying, well, I'm going to invest and try to really kind of change the way that I operate my business or change the way that I operate my firm. And to be honest, we probably don't see as much of that in the top end, but the small law space, that's actually where there's kind of like the cool stuff happening. That smaller firms are much more willing to sort of turn around the model, and we're seeing adoption of our solutions, but also other AI solutions in niche spaces like personal injury and in smaller firms where they're trying to like completely upend the business model or the process, right, to be much more tech oriented. I think that's really interesting. It's a place that I look to a lot for inspiration for how the industry is going to transform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Zach, I wanted to add one point to David, what he said, because it's absolutely right. Unlike previous waves of technology, I find that sometimes the adoption and the conversations we're having with small and medium law firms is a lot more nimble and faster in terms of AI adoption, right? Less debates, less discussions, because the people you talk to on the other side are effectively the decision makers and the users, and it goes really fast. And I want to give you one example, right? Like one of our favorite customers, or best customers, right? I was sitting down with him and saying, like, why do you like this product? Like, why do you swear by it? And part of the reason he said is like he had this example. He's a litigation lawyer. He goes up against large law firms all the time. And one Friday evening, on an important personal abuse case, harassment case that he was working on, the defendant party came and dumped 1 million documents digitally on Friday evening, right? And they had to turn up on court on a Monday, right? And normally he said, look, without Gen AI, without our solutions, he would not have just been able to handle it, but he could do this all very, very quickly on a Friday evening, be prepared on Monday and win the case on Monday. And he really attributes it to Gen AI, right? So I think that's why David is absolutely right. It's more than just our time saved.
Yeah. And I listen, from my perspective, I tend to think about this a little bit differently. And I think it's not the way a firm necessarily would look at the question initially. But my experience is when I speak to firm leaders and I present this different view, they really respond to it. And that is like, what is the ROI of a nice building in Wall Street? What is the ROI of 2 monitors? What is the ROI of an office and a secretary? And ultimately, at the sort of direct phase is, how do your people enjoy, and are they able to get the best out of themselves? And so the question is like, can you imagine being a premier law firm and not giving your attorneys the tools to make the best of themselves? And I think sort of embedded in that best of themselves or best work product they can deliver is also providing them with an experience that's delightful. And the fact is, I think that a lot of people who've worked with AI, and especially those that are thinking beyond of like, how do I get it to automate the boring stuff so that I can focus on the high level creative stuff? I think that's actually flipped. I think, in fact, legacy machine learning very often is better at the easy stuff than a large language model. But where a large language model is amazing is its ability to really like begin, no, pardon the phrase, vibing with you. And that creative experience and thinking through documents, where it doesn't matter if it's generating, a hallucination, because you're not saying, I want you to write the brief for me. You're saying like, hey, help me think through this, flag something that I didn't, find something that you think is persuasive. And I think that creative process is just so much better a way of working for most attorneys, because let's face it, if you've ever been to the practice floors of a law firm, you are not looking at like an open concept startup. That's just not how they're built. They are built very often, and even some of the newer firms that have redesigned space, it's still like office pods. It is a lonely experience sometime being an attorney. And there isn't always someone that you can immediately brainstorm with on demand. So sure, might you like to schedule some time with a senior partner, or maybe even someone who's junior to you, to work through something together? Yes, but they're not on demand. They don't have energy no matter when you need it. They're not there at 2 a.m. They don't have the memory that AI has. They don't have its recall. They may not even have some of its like quick reasoning abilities. So I think that, when I think about the ROI, I think it may ultimately come down both to preventing client churn and attorney churn, which is to say that a big firm today, or maybe, year and 2 years from now, that has an antiquated approach to AI may see it really difficult to recruit the best staff. And it may be like a major red flag. And I think that it's high stakes, meaning choosing the right tools and ones that are going to offer the lawyers those experiences. I think are going to be, at a really serious premium. Let me come back to.
But by the way, Zach, that's
yeah,
a great perspective. I really like the way you put it. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think we absolutely see that behavior as well, right? Like adoption is driven by which solutions are the most delightful, but also the ones that are just frankly the most helpful, even if it's not going to be in the same sort of measurable way. But one thing which I would say is that when we look at how people are using a lot of these tools, and you kind of say like, "Hey, how do I have like a thought partner or something that can help me with problem solving, et cetera?" I think there is a divide between sort of general, sort of common sense knowledge versus legal problem solving and knowledge. And so, even what we see with a lot of firms is that they adopt solutions like Copilot or ChatGPT, and they say, "Well, I can use this for things like, A, I need to understand like what's happening with this company, right? Or I need to understand like what's happening in the news, or I need to understand some general thing." But then they go to a legal specific tool when they want to have someone to problem solve or to again vibe with or to debate a legal issue. And I think so. That's I think an interesting dynamic that's showing up as well, which is you'll have different assistants or different agents that you would want to talk to for different topics, right? And people are starting, I think, get a sense about, hey, what's suitable, what's appropriate to be able to ask different solutions. And what's the big differentiator, I think, for a lot of the legal solutions is like, what do they know, right? What kind of knowledge do they have? And I think that's where TR does have a strength. We haven't really dug into that as much here, but what we're really excited about is how do we really kind of connect, the reasoning, the capability of the Gen AI foundation models with the knowledge and the information which TR offers, and frankly, most of our customers already subscribe to,
correct,
as part of our solutions.
On the TR note, there's sort of 2 points, and I'm not sure if you can speak to either of them because maybe it goes beyond the scope of this this report or this survey, excuse me. But I wanted to ask them because they're things that I think about, and I think that they speak to a lot of the conversation that's kind of going on right now, especially surrounding the question of tools of general application versus vertical application layer. Right. So this is not like you've clearly, that this conversation is going on. I'm sure it'll be a conversation at the upcoming ILTACon conference. I've noticed that, in Thomson's earnings, AI is never listed as a kind of risk in a sense that like, well, this could impact our business. But we are seeing, at least according to many other surveys, is that the tools that lawyers are using predominantly are the chat GPTs and others like it. And there's a certain stickiness. It doesn't suggest that one tool is better or not, but there's, there is a definite network effect and kind of customer or user loyalty to some of the foundation models. Is this is there a risk here, or is AI really only an opportunity for Thomson?
Oh, I think we've actually been really clear that there is a risk. I remember I was standing up on stage at our investor day a couple of years ago, and what I said was, at Thomson Reuters, if we don't invest in AI, then our solutions will become obsolete. That at the end of the day, what Gen AI is great at is our 2 basic kind of jobs, which is information retrieval and document production or kind of work product production, and that's what almost all of our products at Thomson Reuters do. Right? They're either sort of a research system that works on information retrieval, or we help people to produce a document, be it a contract or a brief or a tax return or other things within our business. And so we absolutely see it as both a risk and an opportunity, and hence the reason why we've invested pretty aggressively to enhance and to be able to build new products.
And on that, I don't want to interrupt you, but my second question was, I know that you're publicly still earmarking money for acquisitions, and obviously we've got the legal AI market. I can't even call it the legal tech market because legal tech at this point feels so 2022. So the legal AI market is absolutely exploding with news of funding rounds and milestones previously not reached. So as you're looking around, To the degree you can speak to it, I'd like to better understand what that ecosystem looks like. Like, do you need to make more? I mean, obviously you've got the money earmarked, but like, what are you looking at? Like, what's interesting to you? Without obviously naming names, that you kind of speak to it, to the degree you can.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a popular topic, and we've said before, like we have a three-pronged strategy here, which is we're going to build, we're going to buy, we're going to partner, and we'll do it when it's when each of those tactics makes the most sense for
right. And
Thomson Reuters.
For people watching this, like, you bought CoCounsel, you've partnered with Spellbook, and you've obviously continued building your own Westlaw products. So if people don't like that, I think that three-pronged strategy definitely is coming through to the public.
I mean, it's hard for us to share like thesis or specific investments that we're looking at, but we try to take a look at the entire market and say, again, what is more advanced or what is better for us to acquire that would give us an advantage or that would help us to accelerate our work, but in particular, what benefits our customers and what benefits the other teams that we have. We really look at trying to acquire technology and products where we get an outsized impact to everything else that we're doing at TR. And that was absolutely the case when we acquired Casetext and CoCounsel, which is we saw all the work that we were doing, all the tech that we were developing, all the products we were developing. We said, you know what? It would be better for our customers if we had a single legal AI system, which could then access and take advantage of the different tools, the different skills, the different data and content that we had at TR. And so it was about connecting and producing a better solution, a better product for our customers. So that's at least the way that we look at it. We're quite active, though, as you can see. We invest both on the venture side and acquire through just like regular corporate development. And we think it's an important part of our strategy because there's a ton of innovation obviously happening right now within the startup space.
Yeah, so maybe Zach, David, just to add, right? So one of the things we've been thinking about a lot is general purpose AI versus function specific, domain specific, if you want to call it. And our firm belief is that domain specific AI will win. And by the way, this is not just us, right? If you look across industries like healthcare, like customer support, lots of different things, right? You see the level of innovation with these domain specific AI and how it differentiates from the general purpose models, right? I think that's our firm belief. Just carrying that belief through within the legal space, right? You have to be consistent with your beliefs. You also have to then think that even micro domain specific legal AI models will have value over general purpose models like CoCounsel, right? Which is kind of the thesis behind our partner strategy, right? Like, for example, one of the partners we've been working very closely with recently is a company called Noetica. Very exciting legal AI startup focused on the financing, funding, capital markets kind of space. And they do things which is a lot more detailed to that domain than what CoCounsel would do across the legal space, right? So I think just to explain, that's a philosophy, that's a thinking, and consistent with what David said, right? We use that as a framework to think about where do we partner, where do we buy.
Meaning your thesis is vertical and industry specific, and rather than try to correct for that by buying general applications, the question is like, how can we get even more vertical and industry specific and cater to niches that others may not look at?
Exactly, right.
Which makes a lot of sense.
While balancing the user experience, if I can say that, and David is more articulate in talking about it than I am, but you need to put that balance, and that's where our strategy is going, is to provide that micro expertise, to give it under the umbrella of a delightful, simplified user experience for everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's also comes down to just the utility as well you get from the solutions, which is the comparison that we sometimes look at is like, oh well, how well does a Westlaw or another competing sort of legal research product compare versus the general solution from Google, Gemini, or from ChatGPT?
And you want things where the deltas. You want things where the delta is much more significant.
Exactly, right? And so I think what's happening is the market is continuing to just innovate and say like, okay, well, we're going to make better things or make better things. And I think what we're seeing is that general purpose tools can solve a broad set of use cases, but once you want to create something which is which is tuned for your domain or for your work, you can provably get better performance, right? If you have, a company or a startup or someone that's building something specific. And so Noetic is a great example where, like, yes, you could use ChatGPT or a foundation model or build your own thing to review, debt and capital markets documents to be able to do benchmarking and things like that, which they do.
Yeah.
But their product does it, and it does it very well. The same thing is true for things like legal research, which is, yes, you could try to futz through, using Google, Gemini, or ChatGPT to do legal research and then figure out all the things it doesn't have or the missing pieces or whether or not it researched it in a thoughtful way. Or you could use a product like Westlaw or Westlaw Deep Research to go and do sophisticated research using AI. And so I think it gets born out of the performance of the products, right? And so maybe I'm just being too sort of instrumental about it.
No, I appreciate that. Never a dull moment in this market.
Yeah, and I give you a custom example, right? And it doesn't mean that lawyers pick one or the other, right? The realistic scenarios, they're going to have the general purpose models, they're going to have the legal models like co-counsel, right? They're going to have both. And I was talking at lunch with one of the lawyers, and they were saying they were using both. And I said, look, why do you use both? And they were saying, look, it's interesting for me to see how a Claude thinks and an OpenAI Deep Research thinks, but I know that when I look at the answers from co-counsel, that this is a lot more reliable. There's far less hallucination, right? I don't have to double check it. Whereas anything I get from Anthropic or like OpenAI Deep Research, it opens my thinking, but I need to go and validate everything because I'm not 100% sure if it is all accurate, right?
Yeah, without making all the paralegals in the world despise me, it's the difference between reviewing the work of a paralegal, might be a very smart person, graduated from a top school and is on their way to law school, but they haven't gone through that training yet, versus how you might review the work of like a junior attorney, which totally makes sense to me. I appreciate both of you joining. This has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate the survey because I think it gives those who are, those of us who are trying to find signal, in the noise, really a lot to think about, and not just the data points, but as I said, the way you've thought about, what are some of the questions that we should be asking. So I deeply appreciate both of you joining.
A pleasure, Zach. It was really, really fun chatting with you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.